let's jump to my favorite book you've written, Why Buddhism Is True. And that's clearly, to some people, a provocative title. So I would just tell people right up front that Buddhism, there's a secular component, there's what I would call almost a scientific component, and then there's the supernatural component. And when in my reading of your book, at least, you're focused almost exclusively on the secular part of Buddhism, not the spiritual or the supernatural part of Buddhism.
Yeah, I'm not talking about rebirth, being born after death as a different being. I'm not talking about any of the deities or anything else. I'm talking about the parts of Buddhism you could call naturalistic. That
Yeah.
is to say, they're susceptible to being evaluated from the standpoint of modern psychology, modern philosophy. And I think they hold up well, even though some of them sound radical, that we live in a world of delusion. You can sense already some of the connection between evolutionary psychology and my defense of Buddhism.
Yep.
Buddhism says we, in various ways, don't see the real world. And there are radical ideas in Buddhism, like that the self doesn't exist, like the idea that everything is in some sense empty or empty of essence. And these things sound either kind of crazy or just kind of hard to fathom. But I argue that they have more merit than you might think. And I argue that certainly the fundamental promise of Buddhism is true. The idea is that the reason, first is a diagnosis. The way I put the fundamental diagnosis of Buddhism is the reason we suffer and make other people suffer is because we don't see the world clearly.
Yep.
When you think about it, it'd be great if it's that simple, right? Then you just see more clearly and suddenly you're happy and you're no longer being mean to people. It's the relationship among those things is that simple. The trouble is seeing the world clearly is very hard. And I think evolutionary psychology tells us why that is. The cognitive biases and the other like subtle distortions are deeply built into us.
Yep.
And I think it takes a discipline like mindfulness meditation. It's not the only way to do it. And Buddhism isn't the only way to tackle the challenge of being born with these brains that weren't designed to always see things clearly or to always be nice to people. But I do think Buddhism offers some powerful tools like mindfulness meditation that help us, with effort, see the world more clearly. And I think when that starts happening, you see how it does work, that you suffer less, you're somewhat happier, and you're being less of a jerk to other people. You're being more decent toward other people, more considerate. And that's the basic idea behind the book. And there is a strong connection to the evolutionary psychology. And that's, you called the title, Why Buddhism Is True. You said some people might find it provocative. Everyone finds it provocative. Some people find it obnoxious, and not without not without reason, I have to say. And if you ask, like, why do I feel that I'm qualified after Buddhism has been chewed over for 2,500 years, right? Who am I to suddenly say, now I know why it's true? I'm not claiming to have had any special insight. My point is that evolutionary psychology, which only has crystallized very recently, this sheds a lot of new light on why I think the Buddhist fundamental diagnosis of the problem is correct, and why I think some of the techniques employed by Buddhism to address the problem are effective.
And so what excites me about this so much, Bob, is that it's not just evolutionary psychology, but I have a computer science undergraduate degree and a philosophy degree, and there's been a lot of work in artificial intelligence. There's a lot of ideas right now about what happens if we ever reach artificial general intelligence, which, who knows when we'll get there. There's a lot of talk about whether consciousness or intelligence is substrate dependent? In other words, is there something special about the biology of the human brain that makes consciousness arise spontaneously? Or could you build a machine, and if it had the right information processing power and everything organized in the right way, would consciousness emerge? The hard problem of consciousness itself, which what people call the hard problem of consciousness, which to my mind is the number one most important unexplained scientific problem in the world. But all of these, evolutionary psychology, Buddhism, neuroscience, computer science, all of these fields seem to me to be converging. And that is really exciting. Things like the Google DeepMind algorithm is starting to do things that the engineers don't have any idea why it's doing that. I think it's called GP3 or GP, where Google now has computers that are writing books and painting pictures and composing music that is indistinguishable from what a human being would do, which in the field of computer science, I'm sure you're familiar with the Turing test, which is basically, can you tell the difference between a human and a computer? It looks like we might be getting really, really close to that. But in my mind, all you're really saying is science, different fields of science are finally catching up with some of the ideas that have been around in Buddhism for 25 years. The idea of life is suffering, dukkha, which is depressing when you first hear it. But then Buddhism offers a prescription for how to deal with that. Like it says, here's life is suffering. Here's why we suffer, because we either have craving or aversion. The idea that the self is an illusion, which is a really scary thought when you first hear it. But once you experience that, it at least for me, had very profound effects. And then what you were talking about earlier, the idea that there's no real essence, the emptiness, or there's no real essence to anything. And again, that sounds depressing, but once you've really experienced that, it has a profound liberating effect, I would argue.
Yeah, and I think it can have a very productive effect on human society. The example I cite in my book is on my first meditation retreat, when I suddenly felt transformed by meditation. And I don't want to give people the idea that these kinds of transformations you may get on a 7-day silent meditation retreat are easy to sustain.
Yeah.
In my experience, you can hang on to as much as you can via regular practice. But anyway, the feeling at the retreat can be incredibly powerful. And I remember I was taking a walk and I saw a weed, a plantain weed. If you know what kind of weed that is, you've probably seen them. They've infested my yard in various places on the East Coast, at least. I'm not sure if they're common in Texas, but and I just thought, why have I been trying to kill this thing when it's in my front yard? It's as beautiful as the other plants. Now, this sounds like a mundane observation because, yeah, we all know weed is an arbitrary category, right? It's not like it says weed in the DNA of the plant. Some cultures deem some things weeds and they don't like them. And some cultures might call them flowers, who knows? But it's deeper than that. It's that you realize that the designation of weed had been giving you a kind of a subtle feeling when you see the thing that infuses your perception in a way that you barely notice. But once the feeling drops out and the thing seems beautiful, you realize how powerful that element of feeling was. And I think the idea with essence is that much more than we know, given certain things, when we look at things, more than we realize, they give us a little bit of a feeling that shapes the perception.
Yeah.
And the idea, and where this gets really problematic is in human affairs, when it's like essence of enemy, essence of rival, and that starts distorting your perception in a way that leads to more trouble, including wars, than was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And that's that's emptiness. It's not the idea that, oh, you don't imagine people being inspired by the observation that, hey, everything is in some sense empty. It sounds depressing, but it's really the opposite, both in terms of the feeling it gives you,
Yeah.
which is the feeling of beauty, and in terms of the possible implications of us all becoming less inclined to attribute these essences to things in certain kinds of contexts.
Another example of that in Buddhism, or two examples I can think of, Bob, are the idea of memento mori, or contemplating, meditating on your own death. And again, that sounds so macabre. It sounds terrible, but my experience has been the complete opposite. It gives you a profound appreciation for the fact that you're a conscious agent. That in and of itself is inexplicably miraculous. And then the other example you're talking about, where you perceive things and you're pre-programmed to have already color your perception before you even realize it. What's helped me a lot with that as it relates to other human beings is meta meditation, which sounds goofy as hell, but basically you sit there and wish people. And I do one where I picture my daughter, and then I picture somebody neutral, and then I try to picture the people in the world I hate the most and wish them well. And it's hard at first, but what I found is, boy, do you feel a lot better when you tamp down those conditioned responses you have.
It is hard. And I continue to find meta meditation hard. But I have had, even when not trying to do meta, by the way, is a word that means loving kindness in Pali. So it's METTA.
Yeah.
But I know you know that, but for the benefit of others, but even garden variety mindfulness meditation, I sometimes find that it allows me to think of people I don't like more charitably.
Yeah.
When I'm not even trying to do meta meditation, if I just get into a state of greater calm, it helps with that, and helps even understand the point of view of someone whose point of view you might have previously been very reluctant to acknowledge.